The Arizona sun blazed like a molten coin in the endless western sky, scorching the land until even the wind felt dry and heavy. Samuel Hart, a poor rancher with weathered hands and boots worn thin from miles of dust, rode his tired mare, Old Faith, across the brittle plains in search of a lost calf that had wandered from his struggling herd. His ranch was small, barely holding together after 3 years of drought, and his heart carried the same cracks that ran through the land. Since his wife's passing, the house had turned hollow, a lonely shadow filled only with the creak of the porch and the whisper of the desert wind. As he followed faint hoofprints into a canyon where the red rocks swallowed the light, he heard something stranger sound, faint yet filled with fear, like the cry of something that wanted to be silent. Dismounting carefully, rifle in hand, he peered behind a fallen mesquite log and froze. 3 Apache boys crouched there, no older than 12. Their faces streaked with soot and tears, eyes wide and shimmering with defiance. The eldest stood tall despite trembling, his arms spread as if to protect the smaller 2 behind him. Their village had been destroyed by cavalrymen only days ago, and they had wandered through the desert without food or water, driven by instinct and loss. For a moment, Samuel said nothing, his mind echoing with the voices of neighbors warning him, "Don't ever help them savages. They'll cut your throat in your sleep." But then one of the smaller boys collapsed, too weak to stand, and something deep inside Samuel broke through the fear. He knelt, poured a little water from his canteen into the child's mouth, and whispered, "Easy now, son." That small act changed everything. He brought them home that night, ignoring the disgusted looks from the town. Sheriff Colton spat tobacco in the dust outside Samuel's cabin and said, "You're feeding wolves, Hart." But Samuel only shook his head and said quietly, "There ain't no wolves in children." Days passed, and he gave the boys names the world could pronounce: Toho, Nantan, and Koso. They learned to ride horses, repair fences, and plant beans under the blazing sun. Samuel taught them to read from his late wife's Bible, and though they didn't always understand the words, they understood kindness in his voice. Slowly, the house came alive again with real laughter, the kind Samuel hadn't heard since before the sickness took his wife. At night, the boys told him stories of their people, of eagles that carried souls to the stars and rivers that sang beneath the moon. In return, Samuel told them about the stars, about a God who forgave. Though their worlds were different, they began to belong to each other in ways neither could explain. The town whispered, calling them a curse, but Samuel stopped caring. He'd found something stronger than hate. He'd found family. Yet, the desert remembers every promise made under its sun. One stormy night, as lightning split the horizon, shadows moved beyond the ranch fence, bandits, desperate and cruel. In that moment, Samuel realized the peace they'd built would soon be tested. The promise he made that day to protect the boys as his own would carry through the decades, echoing into a day 25 years later, when one of those same boys would stand between death and justice, his hand halting an execution that would have changed everything. The years rolled by like tumbleweeds across the barren plains, each season carving new lines into Samuel Hart's weathered face and new strength into the 3 Apache boys who had become his sons in everything but blood. Tahoe, the eldest, grew into a tall young man with the calm steadiness of someone who had already seen too much of the world's cruelty. He carried himself with quiet dignity, his eyes deep and knowing, like he still heard the voices of his ancestors whispering in the wind. Nantan was different, fiery, restless, quick to laugh, but quicker to fight, his spirit untamed as the wild horses that roamed the desert. And Koso, the youngest, had a gentleness that reminded Samuel of his late wife, his heart soft but strong, like spring water cutting through stone. Together they worked the land, mended fences, broke horses, and planted hope in the dust. The ranch had begun to thrive again, not because of luck, but because every one of them believed they were building something sacred, proof that kindness could outlast hatred. But the town didn't see it that way. The people of Dry Creek were small-minded and proud, their hearts hardened by years of war with the Apache tribes. To them, Samuel had betrayed his own kind, raising the enemy beneath his roof. When Tahoe rode into town to trade supplies one afternoon, whispers followed him like shadows. The blacksmith refused his coin, the saloon keeper spat at his boots, and one man muttered, "Savage bastard." Tahoe didn't react, but his silence burned hotter than anger. Later that night, he sat by the fire outside the cabin, staring at the stars. Samuel joined him quietly, handing him a cup of coffee. "You don't owe them anything, son," Samuel said. "The land's big enough for a man to be decent without their permission." Tahoe nodded, but didn't speak. In his heart, as the seasons turned, tragedy came again, riding on a stranger's horse. One summer evening, while Nantan was returning from town, a group of drunken ranch hands ambushed him near the creek, calling him names too cruel to repeat. He tried to walk away, but they beat him until his blood mixed with the mud. By the time Samuel and Tahoe found him, the stars had begun to fade, and Nantan could barely breathe. The doctor came, but said little hope remained. Samuel sat beside his boy, holding his hand as dawn crept over the mountains. Nantan's voice was weak but steady when he said, "Pa, don't let hate grow in Tahoe." Then he closed his eyes, and the world fell silent. Samuel buried him on the hill behind the ranch, marking the grave with a simple cross carved from mesquite wood. The town didn't come to mourn. They just watched from a distance, some with guilt, most with cold indifference. That day, something broke inside Tahoe. He stopped speaking much, worked harder than ever, and when Samuel prayed, Tahoe walked into the desert instead. Koso followed him everywhere, trying to keep him from slipping into darkness. Samuel knew he was losing the boy he had once saved, and every night he sat on the porch, staring at the horizon, wondering how long love could stand against hate in a world built on both. The desert wind carried no answers, only the sound of Tahoe's hammer striking metal in the barn as he forged something that would one day change all their fates. The summer after Nantan's death changed everything. The once peaceful ranch that had echoed with laughter now felt like a graveyard, surrounded by fences and ghosts. Samuel still worked the land each day, his movements slower, his heart heavier. And at night he would sit on the porch, staring at the horizon, hoping that God still listened to broken men. Tahoe had become someone different, silent, sharp, and distant, his eyes burning with something Samuel couldn't reach anymore. He spent long hours in the barn, hammering metal into shape, forging knives, horseshoes, and something else Samuel didn't ask about. Every clang of steel against steel sounded like thunder rolling through the dry plains. Koso, the youngest, did what he could to keep peace between them, his soft words like water on fire, but even he could feel the rage that hung in the air like smoke. One evening, Samuel found Tahoe out by the corral, staring at the mountains where the Apache spirits were said to dwell. "Pa," he said quietly, "you ever feel like the Lord forgot this land?" Samuel sighed, resting his rough hands on the fence. "No, son. But I reckon sometimes he lets men do their worst so others can remember what good looks like." Tahoe didn't answer. That night, he packed his saddle and left before sunrise, leaving behind nothing but footprints and a broken promise to stay. Samuel and Koso searched for him for days, asking in town, following trails. But no one spoke except an old barkeep who said he'd seen Tahoe riding with a group of Mexican drifters headed south. Samuel's heart sank. He knew what that meant. Men who lived by the gun and died by it. Weeks turned into months. Letters came from the army about border skirmishes, and Samuel prayed none of them mentioned his boy. Then, one evening, when the sun burned low and the air smelled of rain, a rider appeared on the ridge. Tahoe, but he wasn't the same. His clothes were torn, his face scarred, his hands rougher than the desert stone. He carried a revolver on his hip and a silence that weighed heavier than any words. "Where you been, son?" Samuel asked, standing on the porch. Tahoe dismounted slowly and replied, "Learning what this land does to mercy." His voice was cold, hollow, and old. Over the next months, trouble followed him home. There were whispers of raids, stolen cattle, and vengeance. Some said Tahoe had become an outlaw, though no one dared accuse him to his face. One night, a group of armed men rode to the ranch, demanding Samuel hand over that savage who'd been seen near a robbery. Samuel stood on the porch, shotgun in hand, refusing to move. The men spat threats and left, but Samuel knew this wasn't over. Later, he found Tahoe in the barn, cleaning his gun. "You tell me the truth, boy," Samuel said. "Did you do what they said?" Tahoe looked up, his eyes wet but unflinching. "I did what needed doing, PA. The world took my brother, and I took something back." Samuel's heart cracked like dry timber. He saw in Tahoe both the boy he had saved. He wanted to stop him, to save him again. But some roads, once taken, don't turn back. That night, Samuel prayed for his sons, for the one buried on the hill, the one broken in front of him, and the one too gentle for a world like this. Outside, thunder rumbled across the desert, and Samuel knew that storm wasn't in the sky. It was already living under his roof. The storm that had been gathering for years finally broke one restless night, when the sky turned black and the wind screamed like the voices of the dead. Rain swept across the plains in sheets, hammering the old Hart Ranch until even the walls seemed to tremble. Samuel sat inside by the fire, his Bible open but unread, the pages fluttering in the draft. Tahoe hadn't come home for 2 days, and every minute of his absence pressed against Samuel's chest like a stone. Koso sat near the window, watching lightning claw across the mountains. "He'll come back, Pa," he whispered. Samuel nodded, but didn't believe it. Tahoe had become a ghost, wearing a man's face, half Apache, half outlaw, trapped in a world that wouldn't let him belong to either. When the knock came at the door, it wasn't Tahoe, it was Sheriff Colton, rain dripping from his hat, 3 deputies behind him. "Evenin', Hart," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "We got a problem." He handed Samuel a torn wanted poster, the ink smeared but the face clear enough to break a father's heart. Tahoe Hart, wanted for the murder of Deputy William Crane. $500 reward, dead or alive. The words hit like a bullet. Samuel looked up slowly, his voice trembling. "You think my boy did this?" The sheriff's jaw tightened. "We don't think, Sam, we know. Witnesses saw him near the body. Best thing you can do is tell us where he's hiding." Samuel's hands clenched. "He ain't hiding," he said quietly. "He's trying to find his way back." But the sheriff wasn't listening. They searched the barn, the loft, even the chicken coop, finding nothing but wet hay and footprints leading toward the canyon. When they left, Samuel stood alone on the porch, rain soaking his coat, staring into the darkness. He didn't have to look far. He knew where Tahoe was headed. There was a cave in the canyon, the same one where Samuel had first found him all those years ago. Taking his rifle, he saddled Old Faith and rode out into the storm. The lightning lit the desert like a battlefield, and each flash revealed memories Samuel couldn't escape: the boys laughing by the fire, Nantan's dying breath, Tahoe's first smile. By the time he reached the canyon, the rain had turned to a cold mist. Inside the cave, he found Tahoe sitting beside a lantern, soaked and shivering, his gun lying on the ground beside him. His face was a map of pain and regret. "Pa," he said softly, his voice cracking, "I didn't kill that deputy. I swear it. He drew first. I was just trying to protect a woman he was beating." Samuel lowered his rifle, his chest heavy with relief and grief tangled together. "Then why run, son?" Tahoe looked down. "'Cause men like me don't get to tell our side." For a long while, neither spoke. The storm outside raged on, but inside the cave, it was just a father and his broken boy, the weight of 25 years pressing between them. "Come home, son," Samuel finally said. "Let me fix this." Tahoe's eyes filled with tears. He tried to hide. "Ain't nothin' left to fix, Pa. They'll come for me come sunrise, and I won't let 'em take me alive." Samuel reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Then let me stand beside you when they do." The thunder rolled again, echoing across the canyon like a drumbeat of fate. As father and son sat together, two men bound by blood, not born, waiting for the dawn that would bring the reckoning. When dawn finally broke over the desert, it came blood-red, as if the sky itself mourned what was about to happen. The storm had passed, but the air still carried the weight of thunder and judgment. Samuel and Tahoe rode slowly out of the canyon together, both knowing the peace of that night wouldn't last past sunrise. The land around them glistened with dew, the scent of wet earth rising like old memories. Samuel's rifle hung across his saddle, but his heart wasn't built for fighting anymore, only for forgiveness. Tahoe rode beside him, face grim and silent, his revolver heavy at his hip. They didn't speak. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been buried in the years between them. As they approached the edge of the valley, Samuel could see the distant glint of rifles and the shapes of men waiting: Sheriff Colton and his deputies, backed by angry townsfolk with more hatred than reason. The wanted poster had done its job. "Stay behind me," Pa Tahoe muttered, tightening his reins. "No," Samuel replied quietly. "I didn't raise you to face the world alone." The sheriff stepped forward, hand resting on his gun belt, his voice loud and certain. Tahoe Hart, you're under arrest for the murder of a deputy of the United States. Surrender your weapon. Tahoe dismounted slowly, his boots sinking into the wet soil. I didn't kill him, he said, and you know it. The sheriff's jaw hardened. Tell that to the man's widow. The tension was thick enough to cut, the crowd murmured, the sound of cocked rifles filling the morning. Samuel walked forward, hands raised. Colton, listen to me, he pleaded. My boy didn't do this. I found him last night. He told me what happened. He saved a woman from your man's cruelty. The sheriff hesitated, his eyes flickering with something like doubt. But one of his deputies snarled, he's lying. He's one of them Apaches. They don't save, they kill. And with that, someone fired. The shot cracked through the air, echoing off the cliffs. Samuel stumbled as a bullet tore through his shoulder. Tahoe screamed, catching him before he fell. "Pa, stay with me." The crowd froze, the echo of violence suddenly too real. Samuel looked up at his son, blood on his shirt, and whispered, Don't give them more death, son." But rage had already taken root. Tahoe stood, eyes burning with fury, his hand hovering over his gun. The men before him tensed, ready to shoot again. Then, through the haze of pain, Samuel called out, his voice weak but steady, carrying across the field. Enough. The sound stopped the world. If there's justice in this land, then let it see truth before bullets do. For a long, impossible moment, no one moved. Then, from behind the crowd, a woman stepped forward, her dress torn, her face bruised. "He's telling the truth," she cried. "That deputy, he was beating me. That Mantahohe saved my life." The words rippled through the men like lightning through dry wood. The sheriff froze, disbelief and shame painted across his face. He lowered his gun slowly. "My God," he whispered. The rifles dropped one by one. Tahoe sank to his knees beside his father, the weight of the moment crashing over him. Samuel smiled faintly through the pain. "You did good, son," he said. "You brought the truth home." The sun broke fully over the mountains, then painting the desert gold. For the first time in years, Samuel felt warmth that wasn't sorrow. He took one last breath as Tahoe held him close, whispering in Apache a prayer of release and gratitude. The land was quiet again, save for the wind that carried both mercy and memory. And in that silence, the old promise was kept. 25 years passed, and the desert changed faces, but not its heart. The small town of Dry Creek had grown into a quiet settlement with a train station and a dusty courthouse, where justice was now dispensed in papers and pens instead of bullets and fear. The old Hart Ranch still stood, weathered but proud, its fence mended by hands that had once been small and trembling. Samuel Hart's grave lay beneath the mesquite tree on the hill, marked by a simple wooden cross that read, "A father to the forgotten." Tahoe Hart had lived a long road since that bloody Donna road that carried him across borders, through wars, and into the shadowed corners of men's hearts. He became a lawman for a time, then a wanderer, carrying his father's rifle and his mother's Bible, trying to balance mercy and justice the way Samuel once had. His brother Koso had grown into a quiet man of peace, working the ranch and teaching the children of Dry Creek to read and write, a symbol of everything their father believed in. The town had changed to The hatred that once burned there had cooled into memory, though it still whispered sometimes in the wind. And then one morning, word spread that the railroad marshal had captured a notorious outlaw man accused of robbing trains, burning farms, and killing innocent people. His execution was set for the following dawn. The town buzzed with excitement and fear. Executions were rare now, but still drew crowds like moths to fire. Among those who came to watch was a broad-shouldered man in a long coat and a wide hat, his face aged by sun and years to hoe heart. He hadn't planned to stop in Dry Creek, but fate has a cruel way of leading men back to where they began. When he reached the courthouse, he saw the outlaw sitting behind iron bars, his face hidden in shadow. But something in the way the prisoner lifted his head made Tahoe's heart stop. The man's eyes, dark, familiar, trembling, belonged to Koso. The boy who once laughed under the desert stars was now the condemned man waiting for death. Tahoe's breath caught as the truth spilled from the sheriff's mouth. Koso had been accused of shooting a railroad man who tried to cheat the ranch out of its land. "Self-defense," Tahoe whispered, his voice breaking. But no one listened. The judge had already signed the order. The execution would happen at sunrise. That night, Tahoe sat alone outside the jail, the sound of the desert wind echoing the ghosts of their father and brother. He thought of the promise Samuel once made to protect his sons from a world that didn't forgive easily, and realized now it was his turn to keep it. As dawn painted the sky gold, Koso was led to the gallows in the center of town, his hands bound but his head held high. The crowd watched in silence, the sheriff reading the sentence aloud. Just as the hangman reached for the lever, a voice thundered through the morning air, steady, powerful, unmistakable. "Stop the execution." The words cut through the crowd like lightning. Tahoe stepped forward, his badge gleaming faintly beneath his coat. "This man's no murderer," he said, holding up a weathered envelope. "He acted under my authority, investigating a man who stole federal land deeds. The real killer confessed before he died." The sheriff froze, the crowd murmured, and the hangman's hand trembled. Tahoe handed over the signed confession. Ink faded, but truth eternal. Moments later, Koso's ropes were cut. The brothers embraced beneath the same sun that had once burned their childhood, tears mixing with dust. The town fell silent, ashamed, humbled, remembering the man whose mercy had once changed everything. Tahoe looked toward the hill, where Samuel's grave caught the light. The promise is kept. The wind rose softly, carrying with it, and for the first time in a quarter century, Dry Creek felt like home again.